the smartest, who may be the most well-spoken. Think about it. He chose Noah. Noah wasn't a young man when he decided that he needed someone to save the world. And he told him to go out and build that ark. Abraham wasn't a young man. Abraham was an old man. Matter of fact, he wasn't a young man when he had his first job. Now, I have come to the realization that the most person in the Bible who I admire the most is probably Abraham, and having a young child at such a late age, I could not have done that. I know what you're thinking, Bill. We couldn't have done it. But Abraham, God chose Abraham to do that, to save a nation. Look at Moses. Moses wasn't the most elegant speaker. He wasn't the strongest leader. And he told God that. He argued with God, said, I can't do this. I can't speak well enough to do this. He said, I'm going to give you some help. And he did. Here's an interesting one that he chose. He chose Rahab, the prostitute. Now that's an interesting choice to get inside or get into the lineage of the Messiah, but he did. He chose Rahab. He chose David, an adulterer and a murderer. Not necessarily someone that would be on our list as to choose to be the greatest king. He chose David at a very young age to go out and kill Goliath. You see, God doesn't always choose the biggest and the strongest. He actually chose a man who ran from God to go out and save the nation in Jonah. Then he chose the most despised person in the New Testament, we read, in a tax collector in Matthew. He chose Joseph and Mary, two ordinary people, to be the father and the mother of, the physical father and the mother of Jesus. And then look at Paul, who was Saul. He chose him, the biggest and the most feared individual that a Christian could face at that time. God chose him to write more New Testament books than any other person. So maybe, perhaps, you were born for such a time as this. And I think we have to ask ourselves, for what are we chosen? Nehemiah, he had, obviously, he had a job in front of him. That was to rebuild that wall. So this morning, as we bring Nehemiah to an end, and we ask ourselves, what are we chosen for? We have to ask ourselves that question: why did God put us here on this earth? What is our job? Because here's what we all have to understand. We can't do like Jonah did and run from that responsibility. We have to think, we have to pray, we have to look inside of ourselves and find out what it is that God has chosen us to do here on this earth. What we have understood about Nehemiah is this next slide that we understand, and it says, don't stop when you're tired. Stop, and I can't get it to. Don't stop when you're tired. Stop when you're done. Because we all have a tendency to do that. We get tired, we say, okay, I'm done. We'll throw in the towel. But what we have understood about Nehemiah is that in the next slide we see exactly what the entire wall was built around. And that was his prayer to God. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. As we have looked at the last 3 weeks, what we have found out is that we need to get God involved. We need to be specific with our prayer, and we need to handle our fear with our faith. We need to understand that we don't overanalyze. And we understand that there are going to be obstacles. There are going to be troubles. And we do that. We take those things, we use them, and we go forward with great enthusiasm. We take ownership in whatever the thing is that we are trying to build, whatever it is that we're trying to do, that we take great ownership in that. We get emotionally attached to that job. We understand, just like Nehemiah found out, that life happens. In chapter 5, right at the time when the building was half done, the people came to him with a financial problem that he had to take care of. He didn't dismiss that problem. He looked at it and said, okay, here's the plan, and he took care of it. Life happens. He went ahead and he took care of that happen. He didn't let it distract him. He handled the distractors. A lot of times we get distracted by the distractors. Those people who say you can't do that. Those people who say you shouldn't do that. Those people who ask you the question, why would you do that? Nehemiah would look at them and say, because I have been chosen by God, I have been put in this place to do this. He handled the distractors. So today, as we finish up this story of Nehemiah, we're going to look at one chapter specifically, and then we're going to bring the wall to fruition. So turn to chapter 8. In chapter 8 of Nehemiah, it starts out by reading, by saying, all the people assembled with a unified purpose at the square just inside the water gate. They asked Ezra the scribe to bring out the book of law of Moses, which the Lord had given for Israel to obey. I think it's very interesting, as we have looked at this story of the rebuilding of the wall, that we went all the way back to about the middle of the book of Ezra, where Ezra started out our story with the reading of the law. That Ezra was the guy who brought out the law, who brought it out, who read it, and who brought the people back to forgiveness. And now, as we finish the wall, Ezra is back, probably never had left. Ezra is back, and he brings back the law. There's a certain element of this story in chapter 8 that I think we need to give serious consideration to. Because I think as we understand what is happening here, there is a reading, there is a respect, and there is a response to what Ezra has read. So on October the 8th, Ezra the priest brought the book of law before the assembly, which included the men and women and all the children old enough to understand. He faced the square just inside the water gate from early morning until noon. Now, I'm going to let you chew on that one. Let me rephrase it. He faced the square just inside the water gate for about 30 minutes while he read aloud. That's not what that says. We don't know exactly how long that Ezra read, but he read from early morning until noon, so let's just say 7 o'clock, early morning. So he read that book for 5 hours. Now here's what's interesting. All the people listened closely to the book of law. Ezra the scribe stood on a high wooden platform that had been made just for this occasion. To his right stood, and it names those men. To his left stood some more men. Ezra stood on the platform in full view of all the people. When they saw him open the book, they all rose to to their feet. When's the last time that as the book was being read, as Mike did earlier, that we showed that book the respect that these people did? They all rose to their feet. There was a reading, and then there was a respect given to that book. So think about it a minute. Early morning until noon, Ezra read the book, and they were standing there listening. Now, if you jump forward to chapter 9, if you jump forward to chapter 9, I think there's something interesting. This is free. This isn't in my sermon. It's just something I want to point out. Look at verse 3, chapter 9. They remained standing in place for 3 hours while the book of the law of the Lord their God was read aloud to them. Now this was at a different time. This was not this particular instance, but at a different instance, when Ezra was reading the book, they stood for 3 hours. Then, for 3 more hours, they confessed their sins and worshiped the Lord their God. So they listened for 3 hours, and then they participated for 3 more hours. I'm going to try that next week. But there was a reading and a respect, and then there was a response. It goes on to say, then Ezra praised the Lord, the great God, and all the people chanted, Amen, Amen, as they lifted their hands. Then they bowed down and worshiped the Lord with their faces to the ground. Skip to verse 9. Then Nehemiah the governor, Ezra the priest, and the scribe, and the Levites who were interpreting for the people, said to them, don't mourn, or weep on such a day as this. For today is a sacred day before the Lord your God. For the people who had all been weeping as they listened to the words of the law. When they listened to the words of the law, their response was weeping. When Nehemiah and Esther and those others saw them, they obviously got their attention and said, today is not today that we weep. Today is the day for celebration. You've worked hard. You've done a great thing. God has richly blessed us. Go, verse 10, go and celebrate with a feast of rich foods and sweet drinks. And I'm sure that they had a lot of chocolate. Amen, Marty?
Amen.
And they shared gifts of food with people who had nothing prepared. How many times us who are more of age have heard somebody say on the day of a fellowship meal, if you're here today but you didn't bring anything, I'm sure there is plenty, so stay with us. This is exactly what was going on here. They had a meal. They were celebrating. What were they celebrating? They were celebrating a job well done. When we come together for our fellowship next week, let's celebrate. Let's enjoy the food. Let's enjoy the sweet drink. Let's enjoy whatever it is. If there's visitors here, let's make sure that they know that they're welcome. And then it goes on to say, and Levites too quieted the people, telling them, hush, week, for this is a sacred day. So the people went away to eat and drink at a festive meal, to share the gifts of food, and to celebrate with great joy. Why? Because they had heard God's words and understood them. That's what they were happy about. They were also happy that the wall got built, but they were happy that they had heard the word. And we understand exactly all of that. So finally, the wall is done. Turn to chapter 12. Have you ever noticed a business that gets built and you see it and they open up and they're doing business, and then about a month after the business is opened up, what do they usually do? They have a grand opening. They have people there, they have a ribbon cutting, they do have a lot of festivities. Verse 27 of chapter 12. For the dedication of the new wall of Jerusalem, the Levites throughout the land were asked to come to Jerusalem to assist in the ceremonies. They were to take part in the joyous occasion with their songs of thanksgiving, with the music of cymbals, harps, and lyres. The singers were brought together from the region around Jerusalem and from the villages of the Naphtalites. They also came from Beth Gilgal and the rural areas near Geba and Asmaveth. For the singers had built their own settlements around Jerusalem. The priests and the Levites first purified themselves, then they purified the people, the gates, and the wall. They were dedicating this wall that they had built in 52 days. I led the leaders of Judah to the top of the wall and organized 2 large choirs to give thanks. One of the choirs proceeded southward along the top wall to the dung gate. Hoshea and half the leaders of Judah followed them. Verse 38. The second choir, giving thanks, went northward, around the other way to meet them. I followed them together with the other half of the people along the top of the wall, the tower of the ovens to the broad wall. Verse 40. The 2 choirs that were giving thanks then proceeded to the temple of God. Can you picture this in your mind? All of these people walking and celebrating and coming together, and finally they get to the temple. The 2 choirs that were giving thanks then proceeded to the temple of God, where they took their places. So did I, together with the groups of leaders who were with me. We went together with the trumpet-playing priests and the singers. They played and sang loudly under the direction of Jezreiah, the choir director. Many sacrifices were offered on that joyous day, for God had given the people cause for great joy. The women and children also participated in the celebration, and the joy of the people of Jerusalem could be heard far away. Think about that. What a joyous occasion that they made this, and rightly so. And we understand exactly why they did it. God had been mighty. He had been great. They understood it. And he had given them exactly what they had prayed for. So what do we learn from Nehemiah? First thing I think we learn from Nehemiah is that we are all chosen, just like he was. We understand that he was a man of God. We understand that he was persistent. We understand that he was faithful, humble, and he was prayerful. Now, I dare say that if we took all 6 of those characteristics and we tried to implement those into our lives, on the day of judgment, we would probably be able to face that day of judgment with great confidence. And that's what we learned from Nehemiah. We understand that it was hard. We understand that life is hard. We understand all of the things that Nehemiah faced. But what we really should understand is that we lean on God every day. And we understand that we don't stop when we're tired. We stop when we're done. We finish strong. If you're subject to the invitation this morning, we ask you to come before we stand and hold.